Now I want to explore our risk mindset from the perspective of a series of different quotes and images. Another way of helping us to challenge and develop our thinking. Taking on the challenge of the unknown to begin with. I start with another quote with an unknown source. I think again it was probably the same or maybe a different Romanian philosopher as a quote I used earlier in the module. If you don't risk anything, you may risk everything. Now, for me, I've Googled and I've seen different slightly modified versions of the words in this quote. Erica Young, in particular, comes to mind. But this was the very specific words that I saw on the underside of one of those flip up seats in a black taxi cab in London, way back in 1998. I was heading across the city towards a railway station to head up somewhere north of in England, somewhere where I was doing work around risk, a risk project. I'd been developing this work in what at the time was known as the Sainsbury Centre for Mental Health, and this was a point where I was refining, shall we say, my thinking around positive risk taking. Anyway, I sat in the cab, and where I expected to see one of these regular adverts, instead this was the phrase that I saw: if you don't risk anything, you may risk anything. I don't mind sharing with you that even all these years further on, I still remember that my initial thought was something about the driver and the driver's capabilities. Was I actually going to get to my destination in one piece? Clearly, it was nothing to do with that. So, because of the nature of the work I was doing, this really did leap out at me. It struck me, and I scribbled it down while we were driving across London. And I've been using it ever since. I've used it in many presentations. To me, it's a very important message because it helps give us a perspective on this challenge of the unknown. Jim Rohn, US author and entrepreneur, also illustrates this particular point. If you're not willing to risk the unusual, you'll have to settle for the ordinary. Well, that does look a bit unusual, and I'm not going to ask you all to take on the challenge of the unknown by strapping a bungee rope to your ankle. But there's the message: that if you're not prepared to go and really take on the unusual challenge, you'll be doing what you've always done. That will be absolutely fine for many people. They're safe and comfortable that way. But again, it's about our risk mindset. How open is our mindset? Going back to that risk tolerance scale that I presented earlier in the module, where do we fit on that? Clearly, this person is at one extreme end of it. Then I want you to think about the rewards of not taking risks. There's a rhetorical statement. Perhaps I'm beginning to learn from Groucho Marx after all. Because you'll see from these actual quotes themselves, they're not necessarily rewards for not taking a risk. Being risk averse is not being specifically rewarded in this context. Dan Pallotta, US author and entrepreneur, says, when you prohibit failure, you kill innovation. I think that one goes very much back to the image of the young woman that I showed earlier in the module, exasperated, surrounded by the files, scrunched up pieces of paper. When you prohibit failure, when that's your focus, the danger is that you'll kill innovation. Is that a reward? It's a question I'll ask you to ponder on. And then Morgan Spurlock, US documentary filmmaker, suggests, when you train your employees to be risk averse, then you're preparing your whole company to be reward challenged. So if you really train, focusing on your employees, get them all thinking in a very risk averse way, that's where you could possibly all end up. We'll all go down the pan together. At least that's my interpretation of Morgan Spurlock's quote. You may have a different interpretation. That's for you to reflect on. Then there's the need for change. which is what I'm establishing across the presentation. Thinking about a mindset based in fear, opening that up, shifting the risk agenda. Tony Robbins says, if you do what you've always done, you'll get what you've always gotten. It's a good reflection in a way. Is it a need for change? It's certainly a reflection on a lack of change. I'll use it and I'll interpret it as a good mantra to keep us thinking about why there is a need, why we should consider change when it's an appropriate change. And Dennis Waitley says, life is inherently risky. There is only one big risk you should avoid at all costs, and that is the risk of doing nothing. But it's difficult, it's a challenge, which is well represented here in this image, this idea of change. It could feel like we're pushing the massive boulder up a hill, not even aware that there's some additional resistance on the other side. So I'm not saying change is easy, but then doing nothing might feel easy, but that also has consequences. I always come back to that thought. There's no such thing as a risk-free option. It's possibly not the last time I'm going to use that phrase. Take a leap of faith. That's probably what the bungee jumper was doing just a few slides ago. But yeah, Conrad Hilton says, success seems to be connected with action. Successful people keep moving. They make mistakes, but they don't quit. That's the important thing, to keep moving, keep trying. Successful people make mistakes. It's an important recognition there, but they don't quit. Keep moving forward, keep trying. Tamara Alexander says, but he learned long ago that a life lived without risks pretty much wasn't worth living. Life rewarded courage, even when that first step was taken neck deep in fear. There's a familiar image. I'm sure it's used in many illustrations and different presentations. Talk about the ambition of a goldfish. But certainly that leap of faith is well illustrated here. And that's one we're sometimes being engaged to take. You're not quite sure if you're going to make it. You might make a mistake. You keep driving forward. Look at this image. Those flippers must be going at some unbelievable rate of knots. Then we need to think about the timing. Is there a right time to take a risk? Well, Joshua Foer says that there's a short window at the beginning of one's professional life when it is comparatively easy to take big risks. Make the most of that time before circumstances make you risk averse. That one reminds me of me many years ago. I actually had a kind of mid-career change at the age of 26. Yeah, sure, you're thinking 26, that's not the middle of somebody's working career. For me, I gave up a profession of town planning, starting in a new career in the profession of occupational therapy at 26. It probably felt a lot easier at that age to make such a substantial change. In our relative youth, we take something on, we have great aspirations, we turn a corner and it's completely different to what we expected. And maybe we just haven't built up enough experience. We haven't become embedded enough in what it is that we're doing. But it feels easier, as Joshua Foer suggests there, to make a change. But does it mean we can only take these big risks when we're very young? T.S. Eliot says, only those who risk going too far can possibly find out how far one can go. And that applies to all stages of life. So again, if I use myself as a case example, I made a career change many, many years ago when I was 26. But many years later on, in 2001, I made another great big leap. So yeah, we get involved with bringing up families and we become established in what we do and we become known for what we do, and it becomes more difficult to make the change. Well, for me at that point, it was about changing from being an employee to running my own business, going my own way, becoming self-employed. And I have to tell you, I was a good few years older than 26 at that stage. So this idea of taking those big risks, I would argue it's not just about when you're young in the early stages of your professional life. Again, there is no specific answer to when is the right time. Only you'll know the right time for you personally, for you and the field that you work in, the business perhaps you're developing, for you as practitioners in terms of the nature of the work that you do. Only you will know, because it's based on your processing of the information that's available to you, of your experiences, and how those change in time as new information emerges and new circumstances, new opportunities arise. So this picture, the big question mark, when is the time right? Again, I'm going to emphasize, only you can tell when to put yourself in the shoes of that particular guy. As I draw this part of Module 1 to a close, I invite you to reflect back on this series of quotes. Did any of them particularly resonate with you and your experience? Note down your thoughts or gut feelings and come back to them a little later to reflect further on how this content is helping you to examine and shape your particular risk mindset.